when I first began to promote this teaching of Julian, I'm just repeating her teaching, and I would be doing it with a wonderful group of people like yourselves, and up would go a hand. And the person would say, "Are you saying that there's no such thing as sin?" And I become silent. No, I said, "No, I'm not saying that. We're wounded, we fall short of the mark, we mess things up, we hurt one another, and all of that stuff, we know that. That's our experience. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that, but you did it, and it hurt. So that stuff happens, and that's the reflection of our woundedness. That's the reflection of our capacity for sinfulness. There's a real capacity there for that, but this foundational truth that Cynthia and Ignatius and our mystics would tell us is that God is present even in the behavior. Seeking, in response to God's love, seeking to nudge us, to move us, to bring us beyond that tendency to lash out or whatever. It just, God is present in the sin. That's what she says. You say, what does that mean? Well, it doesn't mean that there is no sin. But it does mean that the love of God is present, seeking to encourage us, to strengthen us, to motivate us to move beyond. To put love in, as Mother Teresa would say, to put love in the situation rather than. So it's very challenging, but I believe it makes absolute sense, not on a rational level, but on a level of living life. Living life with meaning, with joy, with gratitude, because we're enveloped in the love, in the presence, through the action of God. Yes, please. Yes, Jeff.
Thank you, Father Bill. That's beautiful. Would you say that what you just said is what St. Paul meant when he said, where sin abounds, there grace abounds the more? Absolutely.
And I did not plant that question. But it does open up something. Yeah. St. Paul. Now here's a great example of, St. Paul is a great example of where sin abounds, grace abounds more abundantly. It's the tension, it's the both and. So here's St. Paul. And keeping in mind, St. Paul was a mystic. St. Paul was a mystic. Why am I saying he was a mystic? On the road to Damascus, what happened to Paul? On the road to Damascus, like Julian of Norwich, Paul experienced the risen Christ. The risen Christ disclosed itself, his self, to Paul. Who are you, Lord? And that experience was a life-changing experience for Paul. That was the backdrop out of which Paul entered into his missionary life. And then there comes a point, it's in Corinthians, I believe it's, I'm not sure whether, I think it's the first letter to the Corinthians, where Paul now begins to become aware of some interior struggle. We don't know what that was. But if you recall, he says, 3 times I asked the Lord to remove the sting in my flesh. 3 times I asked God to remove the sting in my flesh. And 3 times God gently said no. And then when you stay with Corinthians, a couple of verses later, Paul then says, out of that experience of struggle, take it away, take it away, take it away. And God says, no, 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 the experience. Then Paul says, and how many of us can identify with this? When I am weak, when I am weak, then I am strong. For in my very weakness, the presence of God is manifesting itself. Both and, not either or. Get over it and you'll be, no. Go through it, because God is present. And again, without overplaying my earlier experience with the heart issue, just prior to the surgery, when the doctor's giving me the good news that I'm fortunate, but I don't think I've ever felt such powerlessness, such weakness. It's like, here I am, 90% blocked. And somehow or other, God was present. And I felt it. Both ends, just the peace and your will, Lord, whatever your will is. I think I said that most sincerely, probably for the first time in my life. So that's so no matter what's going on, God is present. God is present. And the practices, the contemplative practices that have arisen from contemplative outreach, Father Keating and Mary Morosky, are life-changing. Why are they life-changing? Because we're allowing God, through the practice, our consent, our letting go, our surrender, we're allowing God maximum space to do the shaping and the forming. You are the clay. God is the potter. And every experience of your life, God is doing the shaping and the forming. God is intimately involved in the minutest detail of your life. And to me, in terms of our faith, that's one of the great consolations. I may not feel it, at a particular point because of what's going on, but you come back to it. And you come back to it because you're attracted. Why are you here? You're attracted. There's a principle of attraction. You kind of indicated how long you've been centering and what your intention was, what you're looking for. There's that desire. Where did that come from? The desire to pray is itself God's gift. You could have come here kicking and screaming, but here you are. The desire to pray is itself God's gift. So that sense of God's presence, foundationally. Ignatius would put it another way, as he developed out of his own experience the spiritual exercises. Ignatius was a Spanish nobleman, a warrior, and he loved battle. And then he got wounded, and he had to go through a period of recuperation. And in that period of recuperation, about all that was available in the monastery were the lives of the saints. And that's what he began taking in and absorbing. And that began a shift within his own heart in terms of his focus on the person of Jesus Christ. And so Ignatius, in a sense, like Julian, would say, the principle and the foundation of the spiritual life, your spiritual life, my spiritual life, is, the experience of God's unconditional love. That's the foundation. We build our lives on that experience. Otherwise, we're building our lives on sand. And it won't, there'll be the storms and we'll just be thrown, again, disintegration all over the lot. So, what you're doing during your centering prayer, by way of consent, centering prayer is a prayer of consent. You're consenting to the love, to the presence, and to the action of God unfolding from within the depths of your heart 24/7. Never stops. I mean, to me, that's beautiful. God is so good. Not to get into the bad news, but when I talk about non-duality and particularly emphasizing Julia, I don't know about you, but when I was growing up in Salem Willis, Massachusetts, I don't, as much as I'll say this to people, and I mean it very sincerely, I loved growing up in what I experienced as a Catholic ghetto. We were in this together. And those other people, they ate meat on Friday. Oh, they're okay, but, that what brought us together? Those kinds of things. But there was also a dichotomy. Separation. So going, as a kid, going to confession every Saturday afternoon, you'd have to think of things to tell the priest. Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. I was distracted in my prayer, and I disobeyed my mother 5 times, and it was like, wow. So I don't think it was anyone's intention, and maybe many of you did not have this experience, but I would say in my early years, well, prior to some of the opportunities I've had in my long life, I would, as much as I loved the ghetto kind of thing, the community kind of thing, we were in this was great, our neighbors, I felt I was trying to get to God. I felt that there was that, I wouldn't have used the word separation, but it was more like the challenge. You've got to do better, you've got to do better, you've got to do better. And I think that exhausted a lot of people. And they just said, thanks, but no thanks. For their own sanity. So we don't judge them. And I think now, since I usually, for myself, in terms of significant experiences in my life that have helped to bring about, I believe, I feel a major shift in terms of the focus on the love, the presence, the action of God, the non-duality, began when I had the opportunity to go to Duquesne University and experience Van Kaam's teaching on a lived spirituality. The difference between theology and spirituality, the differences between the what and the how question.